games. Sometimes I have to remind myself that we actually have to make them here in our game dev studio, and I can't just make videos talking to you guys about, game dev experiences. A long time ago at this point, we released our first game, Forge Industry, and now it's finally time to talk a bit more about our next awesome game. Okay, I know it doesn't look that great yet, but hear me out. We are working on our next game, Songs of Everjade, which is a 2D top-down roguelite set in an ancient mythological Chinese setting where you fight mythical demons, you collect hundreds of items, and generally you just, beat the ever-loving crap out of all of your enemies. If that sounds like something that interests you, go ahead up there, our Steam page is live, you can go and take a look, and if you could help us out and wishlist it, would really help us. I'll also explain a bit more about the game, don't worry, but your wishlist really helps us, so I wanted to get that one out of the way. I gave you the very short pitch. What are we actually making? Well, one of the things we realized that Forge Industry lacked was action, pacing, and just being a faster and more fun game for a wider audience. So we settled on a roguelite. What does roguelite really mean? If this is the first time you ever hear about it, well, a roguelite is a game of something like a Hades, a Wizard of Legends, or another game that we are heavily inspired by is Warm Snow, where you basically do the same thing over and over again. So you have some usually like randomly generated rooms that you have to go through, you fight off enemies, you collect more items to make you stronger, and then you do it all over again. Generally what makes roguelites very special is that they have a difficulty curve that starts really hard because you have no items, and then it drops down the better you get at just playing the game and the more items you get. As a developer, the challenge here is to make your game scale in the opposite direction and make it harder the deeper you go into your levels. How do these levels work for us? Well, in Chinese mythology, there's this concept of sects, and we're not starting a cult here, don't worry, but it's basically the term they have for a faction. You're going to be fighting off other sects, and you're going to do that through fighting through 3 stages. You have your gardens, then you have your temple interior, and then at the bottom you have your dungeons. And then every stage we can tweak how hard are the enemies, how difficult are they, and just make it harder. So probably the garden stage will be quite easy, maybe a little bit challenging your first run-throughs, but won't be too hard. But then the moment you go into the later stages like temple and dungeons, the difficulty really ramps up, and you need to improve as a player, just understanding the mechanics better and things like that to actually progress into the game. On top of that, you can collect hundreds of different artifacts, items, and other pieces of gear that can either influence the attacks you can do, the stats you have, or even just your playstyle in general. All of these items will be heavily based upon Chinese mythology as well, drawing inspiration from actual myths and legends, and also just showcasing a bit more of the world of Chinese mythology. On the topic, we're also planning to have 4 different playable characters. So that would be your traditional warrior, you could fight as an assassin or a sorcerer, which in the Chinese terms is more a cultivator, or as a monk. We've been working on this game for about a month at this point. Don't worry, I won't bore you with the code we learned from our previous devlogs. And we've gotten quite a solid base already. You can do your basic attacks. We've implemented the code-wise aspects of using special attacks. We have the stat changes are already built in. It's just a matter of making the levels, making the rooms, and making a very high amount of items, because that means that when I'm not developing the game, I'm reading Chinese mythology books, learning about some guy who's forged a sword by throwing his wife into the fire so that he could make an even more powerful sword. Very out there stuff, but very interesting stuff as well, and I felt like I wanted to share that with the world and teach you a bit more about that mythology through the game as well. Also, one other thing that I want to mention is, why did we go for pixel art? Well, as you may have noticed, Forge Industry was in 3D and I was the main artist for that. And that wasn't really that great. One of the biggest pieces of feedback we got was that the game didn't look so well. After we finished Forge Industry, we tried to skill up a few of our other developers, because this game is much less development heavy, to become 3D character artists or 3D prop artists. But honestly, progress went too slow there. And then suddenly one day William was like, oh, but guys, I can actually do pixel art. And we were like, where has this information been the entire time? So now I've also become a pixel artist together with William. All of the characters William has done, all of the tiles and UI is going to be more of my jam. And that way I think we can make a much nicer looking game. I mean, if you look at this game after 1 month of development versus Forge Industry after 4 months of development, there's already a massive difference. And we learned that if you want to market a game, well, you need to have a pretty game. That's just how game development works. Now, this is also where I want to take a moment to answer probably the biggest question you are going to have right now. Mornix, you're white. Why the fuck are you making a game about Chinese mythology? Isn't that like the pinnacle of cultural appropriation? Maybe, but hear me out. Why are we going with this setting? Well, the answer isn't really what you think. It's because of Japan. One of the biggest surprises we got with Forge Industry is actually that our third largest country is Japan, and we didn't even market it there. We just localized the game and that's it. Japanese people just love playing games. I also spent a few months living in Japan, talking with Japanese indie developers, and I learned a lot about what Japanese people like to play. And I felt that, hey, this is a target audience that we can try to go for again, because, you know, generally quite a big user base, likes to spend money on games, and generally also, you know, we have an affinity with Japan. Not just we have an affinity, there's a lot of Western games as well that are focused on that Japanese era, because it's really nice to adapt to the screen, whether that's through movies or whether it's through games, and there are plenty of games inspired by, you know, samurai, ronin and things like that. But we didn't want to do like everyone else. If you ever spend any time looking into Asian mythology, basically like all the countries share the same mythology and they just have different names for it. So we figured, hey, why not venture into a new like setting? Personally, I also have a Chinese girlfriend, and that means that I spend a lot of my time watching Chinese period dramas, which got me thinking of the idea as well of, hey, there's actually a lot of cool stuff you can do in this setting, and that answers hopefully a bit the question, why are we doing this? Are you hyped? Well, I'm quickly going to take a brief moment to thank all of our wonderful patrons over here. If you don't know, we'll be uploading these devlogs once a month, but if you want even more behind the scenes content of the game and you want even more progress updates and things like that, head over to our Patreon. We've got a few tiers. The basic tier is really cheap. It's only €3.50. I don't know how much that is in dollars. And it gives you weekly updates as well, like written posts on the game. You get a lot more content, and we do extra playtests just for our patrons. So if that's something that you're interested in, head down below and there's a link to our Patreon over there. Now, another thing you may be wondering is, what's our roadmap? What's our end goal? How long are we going to spend on this game? And we're going to be practicing what we preach. On this channel, we often say for 6 to 9 months of development cycle if you're an indie studio, especially if it's one of your first games. And that's also what we're aiming for. We're looking at launching this game already in Q1, and maybe if we really mess up a lot along the way, the latest would be Q2, but not later than that. So we have a shorter development cycle. That's also a bit why we chose the roguelite genre, because it's not as heavy mechanically anymore and it's more just making the content. We kind of got PTSD from Forge Industry, so we do want to make it a lot shorter this time. As for what we're planning on doing the next month, one of the big things I want to do first, and that you'll probably be seeing throughout this footage as well, is I want to make the game prettier. So right now the only custom sprites we have with pixel art is our walls in our garden, which we just finished like 2 days ago before I recorded this, as well as our characters. So that would be our bosses, your player character for our warrior, and then our enemies. But it kind of looks quite flat still. We want to make more custom sprites, and we also want to add some post-processing, either through like dynamic lighting, things like that, to just give it a more warm vibe, because we're really missing that a bit, and I want that bright and vibrant color in the game. On top of that, we want to finish our first stage, the garden, so that once we do a playtest, because we're also going to be doing an open playtest on top of the Patreon exclusive one, which we'll be doing by the start of next month. And honestly, the developers are going to kill me for saying this, but I feel like we can almost finish most of the core code, such as also our saving and loading system, so you don't lose your progress in between runs, by next month almost. And then on, we just focus on getting some more items in, getting more enemy variety, and just getting more playtesting, and focus on making the UI better, overhauling our sprites, because our warrior also is going to be very temporary still, and just focus on making a solid gameplay experience with great game feel that we can iterate a lot on through those playtests, through your feedback, and just by figuring it out on our own as well. And now we're doing something that's a bit special that you don't see in many of these devlogs, because I know a lot of you guys are game developers as well. If you haven't clicked off now, welcome to the unfiltered section, where I talk very honestly and open with you about why make this game, and less about, you know, what is the game, and more about the thoughts we had as a game developer behind it. Why are we making this game? Well, because very simply, we wanted to make another game, but it would have taken too long and we would have gone bankrupt in the process, so we're going for a shorter development cycle. On top of that, we have kind of an unfair advantage with this YouTube channel being at 11,000 subscribers at this point, that we have access to a high amount of playtesters already, and we also just have this initial launch velocity of I upload this video and some people will always click on it. We generally get between 1,000 to 2,000 views in the first 24 hours. That is something that a lot of game developers and people who make devlogs can only dream about. So I just wanted to experiment a bit with a game as well. How does having a developer audience, so not really, you're probably not going to be playing this game that much, or I don't expect most of you to actually want to play this game, but more follow along the development. How can that help? Can we like trick the Steam algorithm in getting over 7,000 wishlists so that we can get the wider appeal and Steam will push our game more? Or is it all just a waste of time? If it's the waste of time, well, we haven't lost that much because it's going to be that shorter development cycle. Also, we, as I said, wanted to try that different art style in a less high risk environment. And also, we do also want to try and price the game a bit cheaper so we can get it into more people's hands. And then compare it with Forge Industry to find out, okay, do I price the game high but have less people, or do I price the game a bit lower? We're aiming at sub $10, so not like $2, but still sub 10, which is usually the range for impulse buy stills. How does that affect us? That's also something that we're looking into. So this may sound a bit evil, I don't know, but I figured, you know, we're very open here in our studio. That's what we're thinking, how we're approaching this. These devlogs are not going to be our main source of advertisement because they're really hard to pull off well, and we don't have the skill for that. So we're going to look into different kinds of marketing, either through advertising or through Reddit or through social media somehow, just not through devlogs. I'll also make videos about things we learned, such as how did we manage the Steam page, what are some things we've learned there, just to bring you guys up to speed as well, because a lot of these games also do fuel the videos we make, because if something goes wrong in the game or we make a massive fuck up, well, that's probably gonna be a video at some point. So the more mistakes I can make, the more videos, I guess, and the less mistakes you make. Anyways, I didn't want to make this devlog too long, so if you haven't done so, please go and wishlist the game, you'd really help us out. We mainly make game developer related content, so if you got this devlog just as a regular player and you don't really know what's going on, stick around, you can learn a lot about how does game development work if you're an indie studio, and if you are an actual game developer and you want to get a more in-depth look into how does game development work, you can subscribe to this channel. Or if you really want to know everything, all of the ins and outs, you can go to our Patreon where you get daily updates of how do we run our business, what are our financials, things like that. Anyways, that's all I really had to say. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!